They're excited about the quote, the possibilities of billions of people connected by mobile devices with unprecedented processing power.
There's something really crazy about this soap. You look at it, and it is plastered. You can see it here on the screen. It is plastered with text all over the bottom.
Okay.
All over the bottom.
All right.
And do you think this text has anything to do with soap?
Hello, everybody. I want to welcome you to another edition of the Uncensored Pilgrims. I'm Marty McLain, along with the irrepressible
Paul Price, and ever expanding.
And
Don't
ever
forget.
expanding. He's just been away eating a lot of seafood.
Yes.
You are expanding
Yes.
from consumption.
Yes.
And, speaking of consumption, that's a good segue to what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about 2030.
Mm-hmm.
Why does everybody have a 2030 agenda? We know that the World Economic Forum has one. The United Nations has one. It seems like everybody has gotten caught up with, it was actually a 15-year plan. The communists, they had the 5-year plan.
Right.
But, they had the millennial developmental goals from 2000 to 2015, and now they have, sustainable global goals or something.
Mm-hmm.
For the 2015 to 2030, and it's going to culminate with the world being more united. And as one of the famous sayings is from the whole Agenda 2030 is that you will own nothing and you'll like it,
And you'll be happy about it.
You'll be pumped about owning nothing.
Yeah.
Now, what do you think about that? You own a home, you own some cars. They envision a future where you would have what they call these 15-minute cities, where citizens can do everything. They can work, shop, leisure, entertainment, all within a 15-minute walk or bike ride from their home.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that I guarantee you the people who are coming up with this idea are not themselves planning to own nothing.
Yeah, and they won't live in a
And they're not going to
15-minute
live
city.
in a 15-minute city either.
It's just serfs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're really planning a new world of serfdom and slavery. And
It's kind of how it comes across. That it would involve heavy surveillance and a lot of centralized control. When you talk about the 15-minute city, that was introduced by Carlos Moreno. In 2015, he's a professor at University of Paris. And there's been a lot of pushback against the whole concept of a city such as the 15-minute city. Even Jordan Peterson, a lot of people like Jordan Peterson. I believe Jordan Peterson may be close to the kingdom, close to becoming a believer, I hope. But he sure does have a lot of influence on a lot of people. But he said, quote, the idea that neighborhoods should be walkable is lovely. The idea that idiotic, tyrannical bureaucrats can decide by fiat where you're allowed to drive is perhaps the worst imaginable perversion of that idea, and make no mistake, is part of a well-documented plan.
yeah, I have my view on Jordan Peterson is that he's definitely not a believer.
Yes.
He's one of these kind of pseudo-Christian conservatives who has some good ideas and says some of the right things about the right issues.
Yeah.
But you shouldn't get confused into thinking that he's a Christian. And if you pay attention to what he actually says about the Bible, he definitely does not believe that it's true. So
Yeah, but he's one of these things. He's one of these people that actually recognizes what's on the horizon.
yeah, he
Some
does.
of the ill intent that people have toward the populace of the earth.
Yeah, so you can hope that maybe he will come around to becoming a true Christian at some point. We can hope and pray for that, but he does often have some interesting points to make nonetheless.
Yeah, the whole aspect of the Agenda 2030 comes from, like I mentioned, a 15-year plan where they want to basically alter or control every facet of your life.
Yeah.
We're talking about the economy. We're talking about the environment. Your ability to own cars and homes. They really envision a world where somebody's in charge.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody pulls the strings, but it's not the little guy. It's not people like me and you.
Yeah.
And if you follow the World Economic Forum with Klaus Schwab, he talks about the fourth industrial revolution and how we should respond to that. And, just kind of summarizing the different industrial revolutions that we have had. This article I have says the first industrial revolution used water and steam power to mechanize production. The second used electric power to create mass production. The third used electronics and information technology to automate production. Now a fourth industrial revolution is building on the third, the digital revolution, that has been occurring since the middle of the last century. It is characterized by a fusion of technologies that is blurring the lines between the physical, digital, and biological spheres. What you think about that, man?
It reminds me of transhumanism a lot, does it not?
It kind of does, and he would.
Whenever I hear them talking about blending biology with digital stuff, I mean that's
bunch of red flags going.
That's red flags for sure.
Well, they're excited about the possibilities of billions of people connected by mobile devices with unprecedented processing power, storage capacity, and access to knowledge are unlimited. And these possibilities will be multiplied by emerging technology breakthroughs in fields such as artificial intelligence, robotics, the Internet of Things, autonomous vehicles, 3D printing, nanotechnology, biotechnology, materials science, energy storage, and quantum computing. So there's a lot going on.
Yeah.
And if you throw in on top of all this, the push that some of these nations are having right now toward a central bank digital currency, you can kind of see how if they can get everybody living in a 15-minute city, and over in China, I've read where there are some 15-minute cities that you cannot leave, without having facial recognition and your digital ID.
Yeah.
And so, that's why
it seems like that's the way things are headed now. I mean, right now it's already come to a point where you can't hold down a job or do anything really, can't do banking without a smartphone, and you're required to do these ridiculous two-step authentications for everything. I don't know if you've come across that yet, Marty.
Yeah.
Having to do two-step authentications. So, yeah.
Yeah, even Bill Gates, I think, recently gave over $1 billion, and one of the aspects that they want to use that money for is to help nations with this digital ID.
Yeah.
The lower rung of nations, the poorer nations, help them to be able to distribute digital IDs.
Yeah.
Which means, you think sometimes it's benevolent for somebody to say, hey, we're going to make it where all these people have smartphones.
Right.
And smartphones really become somewhat of a leash.
Yeah.
In some ways.
They are. That's exactly what they are. You can't do anything without it.
Yeah.
You can't hold down a job without it. You can't transact business without it. We're just, a step away from, all they would have to do is figure out a way to implant the technology of the smartphone in you, and then you're the one who's
become
branded.
the Internet of Things.
You become the Internet of Things.
Yeah. Here's where this one guy writing for I think it's the World Economic Forum, where he sees the world. The name of the article is "What If We Get Things Right? Visions for 2030." He said, quote, "I see a world where technology such as smartphones improve mental health and reduce suicide risk. Sensors in smartphones combined with AI will allow software to create, quote, buddies that will assimilate mental health knowledge about each person and then help them navigate safely day to day. This so-called digital phenotyping uses both passively collected data, voice analysis, cognitive indicators, and self-reporting from smartphones, and it will yield these prediction and monitoring capabilities within a decade."
Yeah.
That doesn't sound good. He continues on. He says, quote, "I predict that people around the world will have continuous, immediate, and effective access to digital therapeutics for mental health. Support will be offered proactively and just in time. The clunky and rigid digital interventions we have today will be transformed into interactive games and experiences that deliver, quote, therapeutic content enjoyable by stealth using technology such as virtual reality.
Yeah.
I see people having access to mental health dashboards on their devices so that they can share their data, which they own, when and how they wish.
Yeah.
I see more research into how people relate and learn to live as cyborgs from an early age.
Live as cyborgs.
I see the potential of social networks to be used to reduce stigma and promote understanding.
Yeah, but what happens to people if they don't want to participate in becoming a cyborg?
Yeah,
I wonder.
And what happens if they hold to a biblical worldview and that's considered not good for your mental health?
I mean, yeah, exactly.
What's the criteria?
Is being a Christian considered to be a problem for your mental health?
I think some of them would say it. I think someone would definitely say it is.
Yeah. I mean, even today, if you don't want to use a smartphone, are you provided with any alternatives? I don't think so.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what I would. I don't think I could have the job that I have without a smartphone. And
You basically have to have a smartphone in order
Yeah.
to function in our society,
Yeah.
for the most part.
yeah.
If you're going to be interactive.
I mean, and so we've already failed as a society because we should not have allowed that to become the case.
Right.
It's already a giant knock against our freedom that we're required to have this device that private corporations produce, just to function in our society.
Yes.
That's a problem.
Yes. Now, there has been quite a bit of pushback toward these goals of the 2030 agenda. I have this article right here. Governor Pillen joins 23 states opposing WHO pandemic treaty proposals. Now, of course, the WHO pandemic treaty was in response to the COVID thing that happened in 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And the WHO pandemic treaty now says, hey, we want all the nations to coordinate together and be under the leadership of the World Health Organization, which is a department of the United Nations. And there's a lot of Republican governors that are saying, no,
Yeah.
we're going to push back. Now, this one governor, the governor of Nebraska, he's joined governors of 23 other states in opposition to the Biden administration's expected commitment to 2 international agreements that would strengthen the World Health Organization's power.
Do you happen to know if our own friend Governor Kemp was among those that was against it?
Yes, he's against it. You have governors from Alabama, Alaska, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Idaho,
Good.
Indiana, Iowa, Louisiana, Mississippi, Montana, Nevada, New Hampshire, North
Yeah.
Dakota, Oklahoma. Basically, your Republican states.
Yeah.
That's what.
Because apparently the Democrats have no problem with giving up all of our sovereignty. Apparently, it's only Republicans that at least let me clarify. They at least claim to care. Now,
Right.
Are they going to really do anything, or are they just going to talk about it and then let
Yeah.
it happen? That's a different question. But
Yeah, and some of them are, Republicans in name only, the rhinos.
The rhinos.
Or
A lot of
the
Republicans-
Uniparty and all that. So we understand that there's folks on both sides of the political aisle that is in for bigger government and more surveillance.
a lot of times the Republicans will talk like they're against it, and then behind closed doors they'll vote it in.
It's very frustrating.
Yeah,
Or do nothing to let it happen.
yeah,
Maybe they won't be proactive, and maybe they'll just withdraw and allow certain things
Yes.
to happen.
yes,
Anyway, the United Nations, Tedros, the head of the United Nations, acknowledged that 2 years of the negotiations ended without a final draft of the global agreement. So it's kind of been shelved a little bit, but they're not giving up. Tedros says, this is not failure. We will try everything, believing that anything is possible, and make this happen because the world still needs a pandemic treaty. They're still wanting to have a device that they can use in order to shut things down if they need to.
yep, yeah,
And I firmly, that's just kind of how it comes across. And one of the things that they did is they started putting pressure on some of these companies. That's why some of these companies in the free market, society, they've made some crazy business decisions that has hurt their bottom line
yeah,
because there's been a lot of influence from government into corporations, And there's been a lot of coordination in some ways that's pushing, say, for instance, the LGBTQ agenda and
Yes.
aspects of that. But I've got his article from February of this year, 2024. It says, J.P. Morgan Chase, BlackRock drop out of massive UN climate alliance in stunning move. Now, the United States Climate Alliance, that's part of the whole 2030 agenda. But it says J.P. Morgan and institutional investors, BlackRock and State Street Global Advisors, SSGA, on Thursday announced that they are quitting, or in the case of BlackRock, substantially scaling back involvement in a massive United Nations Climate Alliance formed to combat global warming through corporate sustainability agreements.
Mm-hmm.
They had this one group called Climate Action 100. And it's all these countries that they get involved with the ESGs, the environmental, social, and governance priorities, and basically do not what's best for the company and for the shareholders, but they have the stakeholders that, how's it going to affect the people, the regular people, not the people who are invested in the company.
Yeah,
and
that's how
going
they
to affect the environment.
That's how they justify these types of things now in the corporate world. Instead of talking about shareholders, they talk about stakeholders.
Right.
And then that can be defined any way that they want.
It gives them a lot of wiggle room, and they should have a fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders.
Yes.
But somehow that gets stepped over.
Yep.
But this whole Climate Action 100, here's from this article. It was formally established in December of 2017 at the United Nations as a way of aligning the world's largest private sector financiers of greenhouse gas producers. Since the association was created, it has grown to include more than 700 financial institutions that are collectively responsible for a staggering $68 trillion in assets under management. Man, it's hard to compete with that.
Yeah.
I mean, you're talking about $68 trillion under asset management, and they have all these people on board. You really don't have to have treaties from nations if you can control the economies through the corporations.
That's true. Yeah.
And, that kind of seems like some of that has been happening recently. But here's what President Trump said about the whole environmental movement, the whole Paris Climate Agreement that a lot of the people in the United Nations want to push. He said it's not to save the environment, but to kill the economy. And that's one of the reasons many feel like, there's an agenda against President Trump because of his agenda runs contrary to the climate activists, to the World Economic Forum, to the 2030 agenda.
Yeah.
Because he stresses nationalism, make America great again, and you have all these others that are wanting to have a global economy, a global governance almost, which is very scary.
Yeah.
And we know from Scripture that the Bible talks about a coming one world government, which would be under the leadership of the devil incarnate,
Yes.
the Antichrist. And that there would be no way to buy or sell unless you have the mark of the beast,
Yep.
whatever that entails. And so, you kind of put together some of these pieces, and you see this push for globalization, this push for a digital currency.
Well, if you go back in history, we know from the Bible, the first big push toward global government, globalization, we know as the Tower of Babel, right? And God's response was, because he had told the sons and daughters of Noah to go out and refill the earth.
Right.
Not clump in one spot, but go and populate the earth again, which means you got to separate.
Yes.
But they refused, and they chose to try to unite. And so that was rebellion, and God used a miracle of scattering the languages. We talked about that in a previous episode where we addressed the whole thing about portals and whirlwinds and all that. But the point is, the global government that we see forming, the desire to unite is ultimately a rebellion against God's will, that we be like God doesn't want us to unite against Him.
Right.
And the UN and all of that agenda is very much anti-Christ.
Yes.
So that kind of unity is not good.
World
it's not
unity
biblical.
apart from Christ will be against Christ.
Yeah, it's going to be against Christ. And so, all of this push for greater and greater integration, wise Christians should see that as a bad thing, because our interests of having freedom in our own home country, those interests are not going to be served by a global government.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you know, see, this is kind of how they work with the United Nations, with the World Economic Forum, all these guys. They work through these companies.
Yeah.
And through the Climate Action 100. Here's an article that I have. It says, quote, on the latest Samsung Galaxy phone, they now come pre-installed from the factory with the Agenda 2030 app to tell you how wonderful this new agenda really is. Over 300 million phones now have this app installed.
So that is propaganda.
Yes, and
coming from the factory.
And looking at the app, it lists the different goals like climate action, life below water, life on land, peace, justice, and strong institutions, partnerships for their goals, the global goals. And so, even, they want global equality. They address issues like migration. These are issues that nations should address. And you sure don't. Have you ever seen how the United Nations operates, particularly when it comes to, say, like with Israel?
How?
You just have a bunch of nations there that have dictators and that are driven by, say, Islamic ideology or other ideologies, and they're supposed to be the ones that make policy for a nation like the United States.
Yeah, that's a problem. That's certainly not in the United States' best interest at all.
Yeah, and the number of resolutions that they've had condemning Israel.
Yeah.
Over the years. I mean, it's just been staggering compared to who else gets called out.
Yeah.
So anyway, there's a lot to be said about the global agenda, the global goals that these people have. One of the things also you've probably been keeping up with the Dutch farmers, how they had their nitrogen and their fertilizer taken away from them. And they protested. They drove their tractors into the streets.
There was a tractor revolt.
Yeah, they had the tractor revolt. They sprayed manure all over places. It spread to other parts of Europe. And a lot of these regular people are coming out and saying, if they say that, for instance, the Dutch government says that 30% of the country's livestock would have to be eliminated to curb nitrogen pollution if they're going to meet their environmental goals. And it looked like the Dutch government, they were willing for that to happen.
But what they're not mentioning is that is going to create massive food shortages. We need that farmland.
Maybe there's
a reason.
too many people.
Yeah, that's what they want. They want people to die. They want people to be eliminated because they think there's an overpopulation.
Overpopulation, and this is one of the ways that you can deal with stuff like that.
Yeah.
Is if we don't have enough food, and then you start systematically making decisions that's going to curtail people's liberty.
Mm-hmm.
And their ability to have sustenance to survive with, but there will be others that will have plenty.
Yeah.
That's usually how it always works with the socialists or the communists. The regular folks, man, their standard of living just goes down and down, but the people in power,
yep,
they have a lot of money.
They get to keep their money. It's just the peons, the common people that don't.
Yeah, what was it? Was it Margaret Thatcher that said socialism works well until you run out of other people's money?
Yeah. Exactly.
And, UN is just a big, it just seems like to me there's a lot of socialism / all the way into almost Marxism.
Yes.
And then when you have the private companies being coerced or whatever, being influenced by the government to do stuff that the government can't do, that's, I don't know, fascism, when the government kind of controls the companies. You get a lot of weird things going on where the government and companies are not responsive to the constituents or their customers. It seems like
they have somebody else guiding them.
Yeah, it seems like it gets removed in the natural order of things, where a government should be responsive to the citizens. That doesn't happen, and then where companies should be responsible not only to their shareholders, but also if they're making a product, they should be responsible to the consumers, whether or not they're going to buy it or not. And at what price point? And when that's no longer an issue, you think, man, how are these people getting their money?
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. What do you think, if anything, is there some type of significance to the year 2030 specifically?
Well,
is there a significance to that year that goes beyond just an arbitrary random number that they just decided to stick on this
for
thing?
some reason, they chose 2030 because they started out with 2020 and then, the 15-year goals for the millennial developmental goals, and now they have the sustainable developmental goals. But for some reason, they've chosen 15-year plans. I don't know why 2030.
Mm-hmm.
If there's something in their minds magical. But, back in 2000, I got an article from November 4th, 2000. Scientists were predicting that on September 21st, 2030, that the Earth was in grave danger of being hit by an asteroid.
Huh.
It was an asteroid called SG344.
But that's
now,
that
since
article,
they have changed their,
so their model changed. Their computer model updated, and now it's not 2030 anymore.
It's not going to hit. But then they say there's another one, XF11, might hit in 2028.
Yeah.
So you had some, scientists saying, something really bad is going to happen in the year 2030.
Yeah.
I don't know why 2030 has been chosen, but you have the United Nations, you have the World Economic Forum. You had some predictions about asteroids with 2030.
Yeah.
And you just say, okay, is there something pivotal about
that year?
About that year. I mean, it's going to be in the middle, it'll be midway through somebody in their presidency in the United States, so it's not an election year in the United States. So,
well, you've covered a lot of the, hard facts, the stuff you can get out of the news articles. I'm going to bring up a few ideas that are a little bit more out there on the speculative side, just so that we, do our due diligence for our audience. They want to hear the speculative,
the sensational,
yes,
right? The conspiracy,
the conspiratorial, even.
Yeah.
So the first thing that comes to mind for me about the year 2030 is that it's, I'm not going to say it's pinpoint exact, but it's roughly around 2,000 years after the crucifixion of Christ.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, we don't know the precise year for sure, but I think most of the time they say it was AD 33, right?
Yeah.
That he was crucified. So, 2030 wouldn't be exactly 2,000 years, but it's in the ballpark. It's pretty close, right? Now, I do know that there is an idea that goes back to the early church. You can read about it in one of our earliest Christian documents outside the New Testament called the Epistle of Barnabas.
Old Barnabas.
Old Barnabas. And, it's not known for sure if this Barnabas is the same Barnabas that traveled with Paul or not. It may or may not be. But it is an early Christian writing from the very earliest days.
Okay.
And this is what this Epistle of Barnabas has to say about the Sabbath.
Okay.
So he says, next about the Sabbath. In the Decalogue, when God spoke to Moses face to face on Mount Sinai, we read, also keep the Lord's Sabbath holy, with clean hands and a pure heart. And in another place it says, if my sons keep the Sabbath, I will show a mercy upon them. Now, what is said at the very beginning of creation about the Sabbath is this. In 6 days, God created the works of his hands and finished them on the seventh day, and he rested on that day and sanctified it. Notice particularly, my children, the significance of he finished them in 6 days. What that means is that he is going to bring the world to an end in 6,000 years, since with him 1 day means 1,000 years. Witness his own saying, behold, a day of the Lord shall be as 1,000 years. So that is actually a quotation from one of the Psalms. Therefore, my children, in 6 days, 6,000 years that is, there is going to be an end of everything. After that, he rested on the seventh day, indicates that when his Son returns, he will put an end to the years of the lawless one, pass sentence on the godless, transform the sun and moon and stars, and then on the seventh day enter into his true rest. So what he's saying here is that he's not saying that God created in 6,000 years. He's agreeing with Genesis that God created in 6 days. But he's saying that in an allegorical or prophetic sense, each one of those days represents 1,000 years of history.
Okay.
So that was a belief that a lot of early Christians held. And a lot of them had a different way of reckoning the years that they were getting from the Septuagint, which is the Greek Old Testament.
Okay.
So they had, and the Septuagint years don't match the Hebrew Masoretic text years. And so they thought that the 6,000th year was coming a lot sooner. But if you read on that, there's been, I think Dr. Robert Carter at creation.com wrote about, the issue of dating the earth. And he doesn't really agree with the Septuagint years. He would take more of the Hebrew Masoretic side. Mm-hmm. So it's technically possible, even though I'll put it this way. It's within the possible range that we might not yet have passed 6,000 years. It's also possible that we're past 6,000 years. We can't get it down. We can't nail it down exactly.
Okay.
But one of these views out there, like I just read, is that each day is symbolic of 1,000 years. And so that would mean that Jesus would have been crucified roughly around the year 4,000. Mm-hmm. And then there would be 2,000 years following the crucifixion for the church age. Mm-hmm. And then that would bring us to the full 6,000. And then we would enter into the 1,000-year millennial reign of Christ.
Okay.
That's the view. Now, I don't think we can say that that's for sure because the Bible doesn't spell that out anywhere.
Right.
But so it is on the speculative side. But I will say this. It at least makes sense to me. And if it turned out to be true, around the year 2030 is about the latest we're going to, 2033 would be like the furthest I think you could possibly stretch it. So we are in the position in our generation to know finally, one way or another, whether this 6,000 year idea is true or not, because it's going to happen in our lifetime.
Yeah.
And it's going to be around the year 2030.
Yeah, you just see some things look like how much further can we go down this road? Like even with the merging of man and machine and the alteration of the DNA and how many people now are talking about, there's some pollution of the DNA before the flood.
Well, that's definitely true. I mean, the Bible records that fallen angels came down from heaven.
Don't tell Augustine.
Yeah, Augustine. He had some issues with that, but I think you and I both have stated in the past we don't see eye to eye with Augustine on everything. So
yes, that's true.
He introduced a lot of new concepts to the church. So
but he did a lot of great.
He did a lot of good things as well. So none of us are perfect, but in any case, though. I don't know. There's some weird stuff, but around the year 2030 or 2033 at the latest, we will know if this 6,000 year idea is true. Now, there's also some corroborate. I'm not sure that corroboration is the right word. It's not quite that strong, but there's some other little hints coming from other random sources that I've come across.
Okay.
Again, this is speculative, but there is a guy by the name of William Butler Yeats, who is a famous Irish poet, and he was highly into the occult. He was all tied up in the occult. I can't remember if we've ever talked about him on this podcast before, but he was tied up with Madame Blavatsky, the head of the Theosophical Society.
Okay.
So he was deep into the occult, and he wrote a poem called The Second Coming. I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's very bizarre.
Is it blasphemous? Or just bizarre?
I don't know. It's bizarre, that's for sure.
Okay.
But one of the things that it brings up is this beast that is in the form of the Egyptian Sphinx. But it's curious that he says, let's see, He's talking about this beast Sphinx coming out of Egypt, and he says, the darkness drops again, but now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle, and what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches toward Bethlehem to be born.
That's bizarre.
It's bizarre. It's bizarre, but there are some things here that are hinted at. A birth of some kind,
Mm-hmm.
and something being born in Bethlehem, but it's a beast.
Mm-hmm.
Its hour come round at last. And not only that, but he says 20 centuries, which just so happens to be 2,000 years.
Yes.
So the question is 20 centuries from when?
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't say.
Mm-hmm.
But what, you could imply, or it might be implied from Christ, since it's talking about the title of this is the second coming. So implied here in some way, you would get to, if he's talking about 20 centuries from the birth of Christ, then you would say that would be like the year 2000.
Yeah.
And someone like the Antichrist would have been perhaps born in the year 2000.
Right.
Maybe he was implying that. Now, he was long dead. This was written in the early 20th century.
Okay.
Or if he's talking about 20 centuries from the death of Christ, that brings us to roughly the year 2030, 2033.
Okay.
So I don't know. It's very odd. But here you have a well-known occultist
Yeah.
drawing this implied connection to the year 2030.
Okay.
Another weird connection that I've found is this. Have you ever stopped at the store and bought a bottle of Castile soap?
What?
Castile soap. It's a liquid soap, and there's this one brand that you find everywhere, Dr. Bronner's 18-in-1 liquid pure Castile soap. It's a very popular brand, but there's something really crazy about this soap.
Okay.
You look at it, and it is plastered. You can see it here on the screen. It is plastered with text all over the bottle.
Okay.
All over the bottle.
All right.
And do you think this text has anything to do with soap? It doesn't, mostly. There's a little bit thrown in there about the soap, but it's mostly this guy's weird pseudo-Jewish, pseudo-Christian philosophy that he calls the moral ABC.
Okay.
And it's repetitive, it's wordy, it's just words thrown together in ways that don't make sense. So to me, I immediately assume he's probably into the occult somehow.
Okay.
Because that's just not normal. You don't just normally plaster your soap product with bizarre slogans and just all this.
Yeah, I couldn't see that on Ivory.
Yeah, you don't see that on Dove or Ivory.
Right.
But here's one of the things that he says on there. And by the way, they put it on the website. So you can, right now I'm looking at this in a shopping cart for the liquid soap.
Okay.
And here's what it says in the product details. For we are all one or none, as teach for 6,000 years the African shepherd astronomers Abraham and Israel, since the year one, listen children, eternal Father, eternally one, exceptions eternally, absolute none.
Huh.
Now what do you make of that? So 6,000 years is brought up here
Right.
by this bizarre Jewish strange guy who came up with some soap but plasters it, and the company still keeps putting it on the soap to this day. You can buy it, and
And is he dead?
I believe so. Yeah. Let me
Pure
see.
Castile liquid soap.
Here, yeah, he died in 1997 at age 89.
Is it hemp soap?
But he looks kind of like Bill Nye the Science Guy, or some kind of a weird.
Okay.
Look at the picture of him here.
Yeah,
there he is
I
with
wouldn't
his-
put anything that man makes
Yeah.
on my body.
Well, I don't know. It might. From what I've heard,
I wouldn't do that now.
From what
Have you ever used it?
From what I've heard, it's very good soap. I may have used it, I can't remember, but I don't think there's anything wrong with the soap. But it is bizarre. What you read on the side of it is bizarre.
Yeah.
But one of the things that on there, and it's repeated multiple times, 6,000 years.
Yeah.
And then also in a different place, he talks about 2,000 years.
Mm-hmm.
So Yeah, here he says later on, he says, all people added carpenter Jesus entering manhood, but for 2,000 years we rabbis never teach the moral ABC that the real Rabbi Hillel taught Jesus to unite the human race in astronomy's eternally tremendous all one God faith.
Okay.
So again, like, what is the deal with these weird people, these occultists coming up with the 6,000 years and the 2,000 years, but then that dovetails with what early Christians believed?
Yeah.
So all of this to say, I don't know, but there are lots of weird little hints pointing at some type of significance to this concept of 2,000 years after Christ,
Yeah.
and 6,000 years total. I'll be curious to see if it pans out, or if it's all just, if it's all just wives' tale type of thing.
Yeah. It says about from his own website, it says he used the labels on his superb ecological soaps to spread his message that we must realize our transcendent unity across religious and ethnic divides. Quote, we are all one or none.
Exactly. So that's the thing about his message, and it's about uniting the world.
Yeah.
And he talks about 2,000 years. So he's pointing toward a world unity around the year 2030, it seems.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I would have never thought that.
Yeah. You can go to Publix or Kroger or wherever and pick it up. Check it out for yourself.
I'll stick with Dove skincare for men or Ivory. I don't think I don't think I would do that. I like the pine tar soap that that Sasquatch company makes, but it kind of gave me eczema.
Oh.
Yeah, so I didn't.
Does it have a good smell to it?
Man, it smells awesome.
Yeah, manly
it smells
smell.
like you've been rolling out in the woods or something.
Yeah, I like that type of stuff.
That's good. I mean,
but if it gives you eczema, though, that's probably not
worth the
good.
scratching. The smell was not worth the scratching.
Yeah.
Well, Paul, that's interesting. And 2030, we'll just have to. I reckon we'll have to sit back and eat some popcorn and see what happens.
Or we might be in a bunker somewhere. I don't know what we're going to be doing.
Or we may be raptured.
Well,
depends on your view now, and you may not be a pre-trib.
I'm hoping that even if I'm wrong and we do get raptured before the tribulation, hopefully I still get to come along.
Yeah, I think if you profess Christ as your Lord and Savior, man, you got Him in your heart.
Yeah.
But He is the difference. Jesus makes the difference, and even though we're facing uncertain times, and we have people with some agendas that are not benevolent, maybe not even good, maybe kind of nefarious.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ is still King and Lord of Lords, and He rules and reigns, and He's going to return one day. And so we still, as Christians, we have that hope. And we hope that if you're listening to this podcast, you know Jesus as your Lord and Savior. If you don't, you simply admit that you've sinned and that you believe Jesus died on the cross for your sins. And if you're willing to repent of those sins and place your faith in Christ and what He did on your behalf on the cross, you can be what the Bible calls born again, or the Bible also says you're saved from eternity, separated from God. You are saved from the worst thing that could ever happen to you. So, even though we talk about things that are maybe sometimes speculative, or some things that maybe are both speculative and ominous,
yes,
we can do so with hope that we know who's in ultimate charge.
Yes.
And when He wants things to be over, they're going to be over.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Paul, you got anything else you wanna add?
No, I appreciate it. This has been an interesting talk, and
I learned something about that soap.
Yeah.
I'm gonna look for that soap in the stores.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna buy any.
You won't. I don't think you'll have trouble finding it. I've seen it around.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna look for some of that stuff. Well, we want to thank you all for being with us on this edition of the Uncensored Pilgrims. We hope you have a great day, and we'll see you next time. And we need to let you know that the views that we express on this podcast belong to Marty McLain and Paul Price. They are our views. They do not reflect the views of anyone else. And with that said, we hope you have a great week, and we'll see you next time on the podcast.